She thought it would be funny. A teacher, in front of an entire class, pointing at one quiet boy and daring him to prove himself. But behind her smirk was something darker, not curiosity, not encouragement, but a test meant to humiliate. Elijah Rivers wasn't supposed to shine. He was supposed to stumble, to confirm the prejudice that had shadowed him all year. Instead, what happened next left the whole room silent, and even she couldn't hide her shock. But if Elijah had known what was coming before that piano bench, he might have prepared differently. Because this wasn't just about music, it was about being seen. Elijah Rivers was just another kid trying to make it through middle school. He liked to sit near the window, pencil tapping against his notebook, blocking out the noise of Jefferson Middle School's buzzing classrooms. His world was simple: finish assignments early, sketch beats in the margins of his notes, and walk home past the corner store where everyone knew his name. Music wasn't something he bragged about. It was private, almost sacred, a gift passed down from his grandfather. Most days, Elijah blended into the background. At least, that's how it seemed. But under the calm surface, tension was already building. His teacher had watched him quietly, her eyes lingering just a little too long, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. What Elijah didn't know was that moment was coming sooner than he could ever imagine. The day it began felt like any other. Elijah sat at his desk near the window, tapping his pencil to a rhythm only he could hear. The chatter of classmates faded into background noise as he focused on his notes. For months, Miss Abigail Thornton had barely acknowledged him. When he raised his hand, she looked past him. When he answered correctly, she brushed it aside. When he made the slightest mistake, she lingered just long enough to remind everyone he was different. It wasn't loud, it wasn't obvious, but it was constant, a steady drip of dismissal that wore on him more than anyone realized. That morning, though, something shifted. Miss Thornton's gaze landed on him more than once, and not with the indifference he was used to. There was something calculated in her eyes. When she finally called his name in the middle of a history lesson, the room fell quiet. Elijah blinked, almost convinced he'd misheard her. She never called on him, but there it was, her voice sharp and crisp, demanding his answer. He spoke clearly, confidently, nailing the question about Sherman's march without hesitation. A few kids turned, surprised. Tyler, his closest friend, shot him a look that said, "What just happened?" For the first time, Elijah wasn't invisible. Miss Thornton nodded, lips pressed into a smile that wasn't quite real. The lesson moved on, but the air in the room was different now. She wasn't done with him. At the end of class, when the bell rang, she told him to stay behind. He felt the stares of his classmates as he approached her desk. She spoke casually at first, almost too casually, bringing up something he had once mentioned about his grandfather, how he had been a jazz pianist. Her smile widened when Elijah confirmed it. Then came her suggestion, though it sounded more like an order. "Tomorrow, you'll play something for us." She gestured toward the upright piano collecting dust in the corner of the room, its yellowed keys barely touched in years. It wasn't a request. It was a setup. Elijah knew it the moment she said it. The smirk, the tone. It wasn't curiosity. It was a trap designed to embarrass him in front of everyone. That night he lay awake staring at the ceiling, his chest tight with the weight of it. He could picture her satisfied expression when he failed, the whispers from classmates, the confirmation of everything she wanted to prove. By morning, the whispers had already spread. "You gonna play today?" One boy smirked in the hallway. Tyler nudged him at his desk. "Didn't know you played, man." Elijah kept his eyes down, saying nothing. He wasn't nervous, at least not in the way they expected. He knew how to play. He had been playing since he was 5, but this wasn't about the music. It was about the way she wanted to use it against him. The first half of class dragged on, his mind racing ahead to the moment she would call his name. And then it came. Miss Thornton closed her book early, eyes glinting with anticipation. "We have a little extra time." "Elijah, let's see what you can do." The room shifted instantly. Chairs squeaked, whispers rippled through the class. Every eye locked on him. He stood slowly, the sound of muffled laughter trailing him as he walked toward the piano. He ran his fingers over the chipped keys. The instrument was out of tune, stiff from neglect, but it didn't matter. He could already feel the weight of the moment pressing on his shoulders. This wasn't just about playing a song. It was about survival, about dignity, about proving that he was more than the box she had tried to keep him in. He sat down, letting his hands hover over the keys as silence wrapped around the room. What happened next would leave everyone stunned, including Miss Thornton herself, because Elijah wasn't about to play like a nervous boy forced into a corner. He was about to play like someone carrying generations of music in his blood. And when his fingers touched the keys, everything changed. Elijah let his hands fall onto the keys, and for a heartbeat the classroom held its breath. Then a sound filled the air, low, rich, and alive. The first notes rolled out steady, carrying the same rhythm his grandfather once played on humid Arkansas nights. His left hand held the beat, deep and pulsing, while his right danced across the melody, weaving notes together with a confidence no one expected. The snickers stopped instantly. The whispers died. Even the smirk on Miss Thornton's face flickered, replaced with something she couldn't mask. Surprise. Elijah didn't look at her, didn't look at anyone. His focus was the piano, the keys under his fingers, the story he was telling without words. Every measure carried more than music. It carried years of being overlooked, dismissed, underestimated. He wasn't just playing, he was answering back in a language they couldn't control. His fingers flew, building tension, releasing it, then soaring higher than before. The classroom wasn't just quiet now. It was transfixed. He shifted into something harder, riskier. A progression his grandfather taught him long ago, one he had once struggled to master. His hands blurred as they ran across the keyboard, striking chords that shook the old piano to its core. The sound was raw, imperfect, but powerful. It was defiance given shape. Students leaned forward in their chairs. Brandon, who had been ready to laugh, sat frozen. Madison's eyes were wide. Tyler grinned, shaking his head in disbelief. Even the kids who usually ignored him were locked in, realizing this wasn't just talent, it was brilliance. And then came the crescendo. Elijah poured everything into it. His anger, his pride, his voice. The music swelled until the walls seemed to vibrate with sound. For a few seconds, it felt like the entire school had stopped, the world reduced to those chords echoing through the room. Then the final note struck, sharp and clean, lingering in the air like a challenge no one could ignore. Silence. For a moment, no one moved, no one spoke. Elijah sat with his hands resting on the keys, his chest rising and falling, not from fear, but from release. Then, slowly, a clap, another, and within seconds, the room erupted. Applause, whistles, cheers. His classmates couldn't hold back. But Miss Thornton didn't clap. She stood stiff at her desk, arms folded, lips pressed thin. Her silence spoke louder than anything the students could say. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't prepared for the boy she wanted to humiliate to rise higher than she could reach. Elijah turned, meeting her eyes for the first time. And in that quiet exchange, everyone in the room saw it. The power had shifted, because she hadn't just forced him onto that piano bench. She had handed him the stage, and he had used it to show her and everyone else that no amount of prejudice could silence his gift. The room was alive with energy, but beneath it was something heavier, a truth that couldn't be unlearned. Elijah had changed more than just the way they saw him. He had exposed the ugliness of what Miss Thornton tried to do, and the strength he carried to rise above it. But the real test wasn't over yet, because applause fades, whispers linger, and Miss Thornton still had a choice to make. Bury the moment or face it. What she said next would decide which it would be. Elijah walked out of that school with his head down, the sting of humiliation burning deeper than any insult he'd ever faced. The whispers followed him down the hallway, not because of what he had done, but because of what had been assumed about him. His backpack felt heavier that day, not from books, but from the weight of knowing the truth. In that moment, he wasn't seen as Elijah the student, the grandson, the dreamer. He was only seen as a threat. That evening, as he sat at the kitchen table, his grandfather noticed the silence. Usually Elijah hummed while sketching beats in his notebook, but now the pages stayed blank. His grandfather asked gently, "What happened?" And Elijah, with trembling hands, told the story. Each word cracked something inside him: shame, anger, confusion. His grandfather listened without interruption, then placed a weathered hand on his shoulder. "You did nothing wrong," he said. "Remember that. You are not their fear. You are not their lie." But Elijah knew the truth, that words alone couldn't erase the way those eyes had cut through him, the way authority had pinned him to an identity he didn't choose. He carried that moment like a scar. It changed the way he walked home. And here's the truth. Elijah's story is not just Elijah's. It belongs to every child who's been judged before being known, to every person who has felt their existence reduced to a stereotype, to every family that has had to explain the unexplainable. The sting of racism is not in the loudest shouts, but in the quiet, cutting moments that leave marks invisible to the world, yet unforgettable to the soul. Elijah will grow older, but he will never forget that day, and neither should we. Because until the world chooses to see beyond fear, beyond color, beyond assumption, stories like his will keep repeating. So the question is, how many more Elijahs must carry this burden before we decide to change the story?